On July 1st, 2025, a telescope sitting quietly in the mountains of Chile picked up something moving through space at 54 kilometers per second. That's almost 200,000 kilometers an hour, fast enough to cross the entire distance between New York and Los Angeles in under a minute. At first, it looked like just another dot of light in a database full of dots of light. But within hours, something about this one didn't fit. It wasn't orbiting the sun. It had never been captured by our star's gravity. It wasn't from here at all. It had come from somewhere else. From out there. From the dark, empty space between star systems, a place so vast and so cold that almost nothing survives the crossing intact. And now, whatever it was heading straight through our solar system. Scientists gave it a name. 3I/Atlas, the third interstellar object we've ever confirmed. And for a while, that was the whole story. Rare, exciting, but not alarming. Then, a few months later, one of the most credentialed astrophysicists alive stood in front of cameras and said something that scientists in his position almost never say out loud. He said this object might not be a rock. He said it might be a machine. And once those words were out there, they didn't stay contained to academic journals. They spread, fast. Within weeks, this single sentence would trigger genuine, documented panic across social media, spark furious scientific pushback, and force us to ask a question none of us are actually prepared to answer. What do you do when you truly cannot tell whether something out there is natural or built? Stay with me, because before this story is over, the answer gets stranger than you'd expect. And it's not really about aliens at all, not in the way you think. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand why this got so out of hand, you need to understand what makes an interstellar object so unusual in the first place. Objects that come from beyond our solar system are almost unbelievably rare. In all of recorded astronomical history, before 2025, we had only ever confirmed two in the entire span of human observation. The first was called Oumuamua, discovered in 2017. It behaved strangely from the moment we found it. It was elongated, tumbling end over end, and it had no visible tail, no cloud of gas or dust, the thing every comet is supposed to have. It sped up slightly as it left our solar system in a way that couldn't be fully explained by gravity alone. Some scientists chalked it up to outgassing we simply couldn't detect. Others weren't so sure. It became, for a brief moment, one of the most debated objects in modern astronomy, and we never got a clear picture of it. It was gone before we could look closely enough. The second was Comet Borisov in 2019. Far more cooperative. It looked and behaved almost exactly like a normal comet. A visible tail, predictable brightening, nothing that broke the rules. 2 visitors, 2 very different personalities. And then, 6 years later, a third guest arrived. 3I/Atlas immediately stood out for one simple reason: speed. It is, to date, the fastest interstellar object ever recorded passing through our solar system. Faster than Oumuamua, faster than Borisov. Moving with a velocity that told scientists this thing had likely been drifting through interstellar space, completely alone, for an extraordinarily long time, possibly billions of years, before gravity ever pulled it anywhere near us. Think about that for a second. Billions of years alone in the dark before it ever crossed paths with anything at all. And then, purely by chance, its path intersected ours. At first, this was purely thrilling news in the astronomy community, a rare chance to study raw material from another star system, a tiny physical piece of somewhere else, finally close enough to examine. But then people started looking closer, and the questions started. This is where Loeb enters the story, and I want to be clear about who he actually is, because this matters for everything that comes next. Loeb isn't some anonymous account posting theories into the void. He's the former chair of Harvard University's astronomy department. He directs Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. And in 2021, he founded something called the Galileo Project, a real, funded, peer-reviewed research effort with one specific mission: Search for physical evidence of extraterrestrial technology using actual telescopes, actual sensors, actual data. This wasn't his first time doing this either. Back in 2017, when Oumuamua showed up, Loeb was the one who first raised the possibility that it might be artificial, maybe a solar sail, maybe some kind of probe. Most of the scientific community disagreed with him then, firmly. But Loeb didn't back down, and when 3I/Atlas appeared 8 years later, he was ready with a new list of what he called anomalies. Here's what he pointed to. First, the chemistry. Analysis suggested the object had an unusually high nickel content, without the iron you'd typically expect alongside it in a natural space rock. Loeb noted that this kind of ratio, nickel without iron, is something you're more likely to see in refined, processed metal, not raw stone. Second, the light. The object showed extreme polarization patterns and brightened unexpectedly as it moved, behavior that didn't cleanly match typical comet activity. And third, this is the one that really caught fire online, the trajectory. Loeb calculated that the object's path would carry it remarkably, almost suspiciously close to the edge of Jupiter's gravitational influence. He argued the odds of a randomly moving object threading that particular needle by pure chance were vanishingly small. Then he said the line that ended up everywhere. Nature doesn't do perfect symmetry. Now, to be fair to him, Loeb was never shouting, "It's definitely aliens," from the rooftops. His actual position, if you read his statements carefully, was more careful than that. His real argument was simply this: we shouldn't automatically default to the natural explanation just because it feels safer, more comfortable, more familiar. But here's the thing about a phrase like "more comfortable." Once it leaves an academic paper and lands on social media, it stops being a careful scientific caveat. It becomes a headline. And headlines don't do nuance. And this is where the story stops being just a science story and starts being a story about us. As 3I/Atlas moved closer to its nearest approach to Earth, researchers who study online behavior started tracking what was happening across social platforms. What they found was staggering. On X alone, close to 40% of all conversation about this object framed it, explicitly, as a possible alien encounter. Not as a small remote possibility buried in a thread somewhere. As a genuine, real-time, widely shared belief that humanity might be facing first contact. People started using phrases like black swan event, Trojan horse. Some posts claimed, falsely, that world governments were quietly activating planetary defense protocols in response. In reality, an international group of astronomers had simply run a routine tracking exercise to refine the object's measured position, something scientists do constantly for objects passing through our solar system. Nothing about defense, nothing about a threat. But by the time that got explained, the scarier version had already been shared thousands of times. And I want to pause here because this part isn't just internet noise you can shrug off. Real people were genuinely frightened. On forums, you could find posts from ordinary people describing actual anxiety, struggling to sleep, struggling to function, worried this might somehow signal the beginning of something much bigger than a comet. One person wrote that they were having a hard time simply dealing with the stress of not knowing. Another said they were seriously worried this could be connected to some kind of societal collapse. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Loeb and two collaborators actually published a paper, which he later described as something closer to a teaching exercise, an exploration of ideas rather than a firm claim, examining whether 3I/Atlas could fit something called the dark forest hypothesis. If you haven't heard of it, the dark forest idea is genuinely unsettling. It suggests that in a universe where resources are limited and trust between civilizations is essentially impossible to establish across the vast distances of space, the safest strategy for any advanced civilization might be to stay hidden and to eliminate potential threats, other civilizations, before they can become dangerous. Under this theory, the universe isn't silent because nobody's out there. It's silent because everyone who survives has learned to stay quiet and to strike first. Loeb and his collaborators asked, essentially, what if this object is a probe sent to observe us before some larger decision gets made? Sit with that for a second. An object from another star, moving with unusually precise timing, potentially watching, potentially reporting back, before deciding what happens next. No wonder people were scared. When you frame it that way, of course it spreads. But here's the part that gets left out of almost every viral post, every panicked thread, every dramatic headline. The overwhelming majority of scientists actually studying this object never agreed with the alien explanation, not even close. NASA classified 3I/Atlas plainly, confidently, as a comet, pointing to a visible coma, an active gas-emitting tail, and spectral signatures consistent with water ice, exactly what you'd expect from a natural icy body warming as it approaches a star. Astronomers like Jason Wright at Penn State pushed back directly and specifically on each of Loeb's individual claims. The unusual nickel-to-iron ratio, explainable by a different chemical mixture than anything found in our own solar system, a completely reasonable outcome for material formed around a different star entirely. The extreme polarization, documented in other comets before, the sudden brightening. Comets do this constantly, especially ones venting fresh material as they warm. One planetary scientist offered a comparison that stuck with me. Comets, he said, are like cats. They have tails, and they do exactly what they want, meaning unpredictable, erratic behavior isn't a red flag with a comet. It's basically the whole personality. And there's a deeper concern buried in all of this too, one that has almost nothing to do with 3I/Atlas specifically. Some scientists call it the boy who cried wolf problem. If a credentialed, respected researcher keeps declaring ordinary objects to be potential alien technology and keeps turning out to be wrong, what happens the day we actually do find real evidence? Will anyone still be listening? Or will it get buried under the noise of every previous false alarm? So which was it this time? Here's the twist that a lot of people who shared the scary version of this story never circled back to hear. Has 3I/Atlas made its closest approach to Earth, passing harmlessly at a distance of roughly 270 million kilometers, well over 100 million miles away, never posing any real danger, it continued on its path and began moving back out, away from our solar system, back into interstellar space, forever. And around that same time, Avi Loeb himself said something that barely made a fraction of the headlines his earlier claims had generated. He said the object was, in his own words, most likely natural. I want you to actually sit with that. The man at the absolute center of the alien mothership story, the man whose name became attached to the entire controversy, ultimately concluded that the most probable explanation was the boring one, a comet. A strange, genuinely valuable, scientifically fascinating comet from another star system entirely. But a comet. So what actually happened here? What was this whole thing really about? I don't think this story was ever really about 3I/Atlas. I think it's about us. It's about how quickly a small, legitimate scientific mystery can spiral into a global moment of fear, simply because someone with real credibility was willing to say the word alien out loud. It's about how the narrow gap between we genuinely don't know yet and it might be aliens is exactly where entire online panics are born and multiply. And it connects to something bigger too. The same question we explored in our last video about the Fermi paradox, about why the universe looks so empty despite being unimaginably vast. If intelligent life really is out there somewhere, expanding, exploring, maybe even passing directly through our solar system on its way to somewhere else entirely, how would we actually recognize it if we saw it? Would we even know the difference between a rock and a machine? Between silence and a message we simply don't yet have the tools to read? 3I/Atlas came from another star. It may have spent billions of years drifting alone through the emptiness between galaxies before ever coming close enough for us to notice it. And even now, after everything, after the papers, the headlines, the arguments, the anxiety, we still can't say with total, absolute certainty everything it was carrying or precisely what it saw on its way here. It came, it passed by, and now it's gone, heading back out into the dark, never to return. So here's where I personally land on all of this. Not every strange object in the sky is a spacecraft. Most of the time, almost all of the time, the true explanation really is the less exciting one. But here's the part I keep coming back to. Every single boring comet we've ever studied has still taught us something new about the universe we didn't know before. And every single one of them, even the ordinary ones, keeps a door open, just slightly, on the biggest question any of us have ever asked. Are we really alone out here? Or was something out there this entire time, quietly passing through, close enough to almost touch, and we simply don't have the tools yet to ever know for certain? I don't think anyone can answer that with full confidence right now. Not Avi Loeb, not NASA, not me, maybe not for a very long time. So I want to ask you directly, because I think your answer says something interesting about how you see this whole situation. Do you think Avi Loeb was right to raise the alarm, even knowing it turned out to be wrong? Is it better to ask the uncomfortable question out loud, even at the risk of being wrong? Or do you think claims like this ultimately do more harm than good, making it harder for people to trust real science the next time something genuinely strange shows up? Tell me exactly where you land on this in the comments below. I read every single one, and on a question this big, I genuinely want to know what you think.